Hey, my name is Franklin Joyce. As you very well know, I'm the kid in class that ran over the bear. So, yeah, good identifier there. But anyway, this is my metaphysics final video project in which I will be presenting my super theory of super everything. And as all good philosophy should begin, I'm going to read a poem first. Bring me to the brink. Bring me to the brink of mountains, mystic, dread, rapture of fear I feel and fail. Still, the swallow's slicing blue is beautiful. Still, the cloud-tug bell towers frozen music. There is in me a man alive, a man alone, who, heart stopped above a deep abyss, can hear a snowball grow one snowflake less, the clock tick accretions of dust becoming stone. No, I am not that man, not that sadness, with its precise ice, its exquisite rue. The pain that sings in me does not sing, and is true. O whirlwind, O real wind, in which the avalanche is happening, all my soul is bells which will not ring. Oship Mendelstam. So with that, I'm going to get started on my theory of metaphysics. And I would like to say in very brief explanatory prolegomena that I had planned to make this a very elaborate and sophisticated affair, and it turned out that my day did not allow such. And so I am in the youth room of my church in sweaty and grass-covered clothes, and we're just going to make this work the best way it can. So this, just to begin with, to understand my theory of metaphysics, you're going to have some understanding of what metaphysics is. Metaphysics, at its core, as we try and get to what this idea of metaphysics, is. What are we doing when we're engaging in metaphysics? Is an attempt to understand the true nature of reality, or the nature of ultimate reality, or the nature of true reality. And so the metaphysician is going to be engaged with three major questions, as at least as we kind of talked about it in class. They're going to be talking about what is the world, what is this universe, this kind of realm of existence that we are in. What is that? They're going to be talking about why does the world exist? Is there any reason that what we perceive or what there is? And then the last question would be who is in the world? What are the nature of the beings, if there are beings that exist within the world? And so what I'm going to try and do is I'm going to present an answer to each of these three basic questions. And it's important to recognize that what I'm going for here is not a comprehensive lecture on the components of my metaphysics, but rather this is going to be just a brief discussion on how my metaphysical elements cohese and fit together. And that's important to consider as we go forwards. The first big question is, what is the world? And there's three main ideas. You have your monist, your nihilist, and your Western individualist. And I'm a Western individualist, so I'm going to say that there's lots of individual things that exist within the world, within the universe. And an individual thing is going to be anything that is not. So it's kind of difficult to say what one is, but we can say what one is not. So it's not a mere modification. It's not a mere collection. It's not mere Christian. No, sorry. It's not a stuff. It's not a universal, and it's not an event or a process. So anything outside of those disclaimers, those adjunctions, anything outside of that could be considered an individual thing. And so in my viewing of the world, there are a multitude of individual things. Now the question is, are any of those individual things separate from some form of consciousness? So there is philosophers such as Bishop Berkeley who are going to suppose an idealistic view of the world in which there are only truly existent things in the universe are mental image or mental products or mental images. And so whereas I seem to perceive that I'm sitting in a room on a couch wearing a camouflage sweatshirt, so on and so forth, in fact, I'm just a brain that's receiving sensations such that I believe that I'm sitting in a youth group room with a camouflage sweatshirt on. And I'm going to reject that claim. I'm going to say that there are individual things that are existent independent of conscious, but what I'm going to adopt is something called that I'm going to call soft externality, in which I'm also going to admit that Berkeley does have a very his ideas theory is grounded in a very um, far-reaching and I think a very brilliant perception is that the only way that I can engage with anything, any individual existent thing outside of myself, is through my conscience. So it's yes, I believe that there are such things as like this chair or this sweatshirt that exists or could exist as individual things outside of myself. Those things don't really have any meaning unless I or someone with a conscience engages with them. And this is going to connect into the anti-realism debate and the topic of objectivity. Does the universe have objective features? And I think the universe does have objective features. I'm gonna reject the anti-realist claim, but I think the anti-realist makes a fine point in that how we interact with the universe, how we interact with the world, how we interact with the objective features of the world is what gives those features meaning. So even though we can say that there's individual things that exist, or we can say that the features of the world have objective aspects to them, or there's objective aspects to individual things in the world, all of those things really don't have any meaning unless my conscience engages with them. And so I think that's something that Berkeley is trying to build his theory off of, and what most metaphysicians kind of leave behind. And we assume that just because these things have these individuals have these certain objective features that's kind of okay, or that's an important fact. But in reality it doesn't really matter so much that they have the features, but if we're not there to engage with the features, then those features can have no meaning. And then as far as what time looks like, what is the nature of temporality within the universe, within the world? So I suppose that I live in a world in which there are many individuals, and I suppose that there are individuals in the world that have objective features that are separate from a conscience, but I'm saying that those features don't really have any meaning separate from a conscience. They're kind of just there. They don't have a purpose. And but how does that work? What does that look like in time? What does time look like in my metaphysical view of the universe? So I'm gonna be a growing block theorist. So I think that the evidence is kind of overwhelmingly in favor of the growing block theorist, in opposition to the presentist or the eternalist. The presentist is just trying to get me to accept something that just seems far too difficult for what time really looks like, and the eternalist is trying to get me to accept something that he doesn't really have evidence for. Whereas I think the growing block theorist is very well supported, as we seem to have, at least in a fairly interesting but complex manner, we have relations, and we're able to engage with the past through memories, especially, but also through knowledge. We're able to engage with the past, but it doesn't seem like we can do that with the future. We don't have these memories, or we don't always have knowledge of the future. Of course, there's two exceptions. You might say, well, we can observe the causal relations of physical artifacts within the world, and we can, as say, like in a scientific experiment, you can propose a hypothesis for how that will play out into the future. But as we all watch the Weather Channel and are familiar with meteorologists, we know that science can't always tell us what's going to happen in the future, even in rudimentary things like COVID-19 models or the weather. So it seems to me that while we can observe some of the causal relations between physical artifacts in the present and expostulate to the future, that's not always, it's not a surefire method, and it seems to be on far shakier grounds than our knowledge of the past or our memories that we can engage with of past events. So I'm gonna, and then the other possible objection would be, well, there's this kind of prophetic revelation or divine revelation of future events, which I'm not going to say is impossible. If there is a God, perhaps the God has some unique knowledge or access of the future, but we'll talk about that a little bit more when we decide if there's a God or not. So I think that kind of sets up what the world looks like. But the question then becomes, why does the world exist? We have this universe, but for the metaphysician, we want to know, well, why is the universe there? And basically, this is going to boil down to what Van Inwagen wants to call a chaos or a logos. But basically, the two kind of conflicting theories here is either the universe has been designed by some kind of sentient being or some kind of necessary being, which has given the universe a purpose, but has created the universe, and that is the purpose. That is why the world exists. Or the universe has just kind of come together in a random amalgamation of atoms and molecules and whatnot, and it's that just kind of random occurrence that it just happens. It's just one of those things that is, and so there isn't really a why to the universe. So the question of why basically boils down to is there a necessary being? Can we show that a unmoved mover, that there's a starter, there exists some kind of purpose-filled being, some kind of logos, so to speak, of the universe that has given the universe a why, has given the universe a purpose. My position on this is I'm going to maintain Christian agnosticism, which some might say is a contradiction, but in my own opinion is, on the contrary, quite traditionally accepted. As a Christian agnostic, I'm going to suppose that there is such a thing as a divine being, that there is an unmoved mover, the logos, something that has created the universe that we see around us. However, I'm not going to make any strong statements or existential propositions about this being. So I believe, I think there is one, but I'm not entirely without doubt as to the existence of this being. I'm not assured beyond any shadow of a doubt that this being does exist. And I think that a lot of that stems from on both the arguments for the existence of a necessary being, like the cosmological argument or the ontological argument. Though there seems to be good points made and there seems to be evidence that supports the existence of a necessary being, there also seems to be quite a good deal of evidence to support the non-existence of a necessary being. And on top of that, we seem to have in place an extremely well-developed theory that could explain how the world has developed through a chaos system, how the world has developed through kind of this random amalgamation of atoms. And so I don't know that either of these theories are actually going to be trump one or the other. And so you might ask, well, why am I going to label myself a Christian? Why am I going to still accept theism in face of what I see as a fairly level playing field rationally or philosophically at the moment? And to be entirely blunt, I'm going to accept that there is a divine being, that there is a logos based on my own religious experiences and my own interactions of how I view the world and how I view humanity. And so in my interactions with the world, it seems to me such that I have experienced the world such that it is strongly impressed upon me that that there's a very good possibility of there being a divine being, of there being a logos that has created the universe, and as having created the universe, gives some purpose to the universe or gives some attributes to humanity so that we can find our own purpose to the universe. And so as I'm talking about this word purpose, I think I'm just going to keep moving. I'm going to talk a little bit about I'm going to jump forward here just a touch and talk about the purpose for rational beings. So when in the section of who is in the world, we'll talk about, whoa, what is a rational being? But right here, I think this plugs in really well when we talk about, do rational beings have a purpose in the world? Van Inwagen thinks that if the universe is a logos or if the universe is a chaos, that's the connection point. If the universe is a logos, then the things that the logos has created or has initiated the creation of have purpose because they're connected to this logos. And if the arche, if the beginning is a chaos, well, then we have no purpose because it's just random. We're just kind of existing here. I disagree with Van Inwagen entirely because I don't think purpose, when you think about, we'll say that I'm going to say that we are rational beings. Human beings are rational beings. So let's just take us as one example. it's not, you don't gain your purpose as a rational being necessarily from your connection to the initiation of the universe, or even if that connection is a correct one. You gain your purpose as a rational being from your orientation towards that proposition. So it's not that I have the knowledge or I have the belief that the arche is a logos, but rather it's that I have orientated myself towards the arche such that I believe it is a logos. And I think that's possible. I think people do that whether they believe that the universe has been created randomly or whether they believe that there is a divine being in the universe. And so this is where the agnostic part of my Christian agnosticism comes in, because I see people and I read of people like the great French existentialist who, and Friedrich Nietzsche, who look at the world and they recognize the randomness, they recognize they are very much acceptant of this idea that the arche is a chaos, that there is no inherent purpose for the world, and yet as rational beings they find a way to create their own purpose. They orientate themselves towards the universe, towards the world, in such a way that it gives them purpose. And so I think that whether or not you orientate yourself towards the arche as a logos or chaos is entirely irrelevant, of whether or not you're going to find purpose in the world. So the question, why is the world? Does the world have purpose? Is kind of dual. It kind of has two different answers to it in my metaphysics. On one hand, you have, does the world inherently have a purpose? I don't know. I believe it does based on my religious experiences. But I'm not going to suppose that that means that the world has a purpose for everyone. My religious experiences are singular experiences. They're not experiences that I'm in any way, shape, or form going to transpose upon anyone else. And so I'm going to say that I believe the world does have an inherent purpose, but I'm not going to say that I am so assured of that belief that I'm going to transpose that inherent purpose upon anyone. But that doesn't make me say that there are other rational beings who have not had the set of religious experiences I have had don't have a purpose. Rather, those rational beings might be able to have a purpose regardless of the way in which they view the arche, regardless of whether they think the universe is a logos or a chaos. They can have purpose in the way they orientate themselves towards the universe. That's my answer to why is the world. So, brief summary. Yeah, we'll keep moving because holy cow, I'm out of time. All right. So then the next question is, who is in the world? So we have, what is the world? The world is a collection of individual things that have objective features that we can know through our conscience and are maybe moving through time, but the time in the past exists and in the present exists, and then it's kind of moving, growing into the future. The future is kind of this, unexistent big question mark. And I personally believe through my religious experiences that there is a divine being that has created the universe inherent within purpose, but there is a manner in which we can orientate ourselves as rational beings towards the universe such that we gain purpose. So, but what do I mean when I say rational beings? Like, what is a rational being? Now, Van Inwagen wants to say that rational beings are just human beings. He's really, and I do think he has a very good basis and a very good argument to support this. When we're talking about what a rational being is, we want to focus on, is that being able to engage in abstract reasoning? Is that being able to express emotion? Is that being able to engage with memories? Is that being in what manner is that being interact with other beings? Is it able to show kind of a moral understanding of itself or others? Is it able to show a recognition, a relational recognition between itself and others? And all of these are really interesting questions. And I'm going to accept Van Inwagen's proposal that we human beings are rational beings. It just seems like that's something that, because we're having this conversation and because we've set up these definitions of rational beings, of course we're going to set them up so that we fall into them. But what I'm not going to suppose is that we are the only rational beings in the universe. And there's kind of two reasons. I think it would be evolutionally irresponsible to suppose this, especially if you're going to accept the theory of evolution and the origins of humanity through that, then you have no grounds whatsoever to reject the if nature has given rise, if evolution has given rise to your own rationality, then you should expect to see lesser but developing rationalities around you. And I think that is what we see in many different cases. But I also think it's rationally irresponsible to assume that we are the only rational being. If you look at, there's a multitude of what we would consider animal or lesser organisms that exhibit emotion, that exhibit abstract reasoning, that exhibit memory, that exhibit interaction, but they simply do so in manners that are kind of alien, kind of foreign to us. And so I think too often we say, well, they're just undeveloped. Their rationality is lesser, or they're lesser intelligences. And perhaps that's true, or perhaps we've simply so defined intelligence that, we are the ultimatum of intelligence. And that's a scary thought in and of itself. If we are the ultimatum of intelligence and Donald Trump is the president, then we have some serious problems in the universe. I hope there's a better intelligence than us. But anyway, what I can say for my metaphysics is that I will accept that we are rational beings, but that is not an exhaustive, nor is it an exclusive definition. I'm not shutting the door on other rational beings existing, but for the purpose of my metaphysics, what we're kind of focusing on is me. Let's just be honest. That's the important person here, I was so tempted, brief break, because I'm a Baptist and we need to have our laughs in the middle of our lectures. But I seriously considered, I was tired, I wanted to get this done, and I was just like, you know what? I'm just gonna be like, I'm a monist and I'm a solipsist. So like, I am God and I am the world at the same time. Okay, you can ignore that if you need to. But anyway, so what's the nature of rational beings? So if we say, or to be specific, let's say what's the nature of me? And I'm going to very firmly argue with the physicalist here and against. I think I've already kind of rejected Bishop Berkeley's theory of idealism, because that's not going to fit very well with my supposition that the world is full of individuals that might not be connected to consciences. And so I can't really say then that I'm actually a spiritual being, or I'm a mental being and I don't have any physical connection, because that doesn't make sense with the rest of my metaphysics. Neither am I going to say that I'm a substance dualist, even though that could help some of my other aspects of my metaphysics. I think substance dualism is just far too faulty of a theory to suppose. We're going to take a break. There's a turkey up here. I don't know if you can see it. Top of the pasture. Okay, sorry. It was distracting me, so I figured I would show you. Back to it. So what I'm left with is physicalism, and I'm not gonna be complain about this at all. I really like the physicalist supposition, because I think it makes sense not only with the rest of my metaphysics, but it also makes sense with the world, and it makes sense with my understanding of God and my understanding of theology. Now, there's lots of pushback against physicalism, but I've addressed those elsewhere. And as I said, I'm not only running out of time, but this is a comprehensive lecture. So then the question becomes, what can those rational beings do? And the natural response may be, well, they can think and they can act and they can live their lives, or maybe they can orientate themselves towards the universe such that they have purpose. But all of those are supposing that we can choose to do this, that we can act, that we can make conscious decisions to alter the way in which we are orientated toward things, or in the way that we decide to do things. And so all of those are based on this idea of free will. But yet, as has been presented, it seems that the physical world, it seems that the universe is kind of just marching on in this rather determined cause and effect sort of manner. And so whether or not I say that there's a logos or a chaos that has started this chain, it just seems like, I woke up this morning and, went turkey hunting instead of going and working on my video project. And so that led to me eating waffles, and that led to me being here in camouflage clothing in a Sunday school room giving this talk. So it doesn't really seem like the decisions that I make are necessarily always my free decisions. A lot of the time, it seems as if, in fact, they are very determined decisions. And so I'm going to I'm just going to be honest. I don't know exactly what I'm going to say about free will right now. I think I am still far too young and know far too little of the world, and am not nearly wise enough to suppose that I can have an answer to this. What I am going to say is what will fit with my theory. So what will fit with my theory is I'm going to say either a soft determinist or a doubtful libertarian view of the world will fit nicely with my metaphysics, and I'll explain both of those very, very briefly and get you out of here quick. But in a soft determinist view, I'm going to admit that it does seem very likely that there are long causal chains, that there are these very determined physical causal chains that cause things to occur. However, I don't think it's evidentially responsible to accept that those causal chains stretch back indefinitely. So I'm not so sure that the butterfly in the Himalayas was going to cause the hurricane in New Orleans. And I'm also not so sure that if we roll back to time that I will sneeze at 8:35 p.m. last night, or that I will give this lecture 25.52 minutes long. I'm not sure that that's going to be true. I think that we don't really have evidence. We assume we have evidence. We kind of expostulate because it seems like you can just track the physical causal events just as minutely as you so desire. It seems like we could just do that on back into eternity, but we haven't. And we don't have quantitative evidence that that's true. And as a soft determinist, I'm going to recognize that there is definite influence, and in fact, it might even be deterministic influence on the actions that I choose. But I still, as a rational being, in my evaluation of my decisions, I can recognize that influence, and I will act on that influence. I might not act freely. I will admit that. I might not act freely. I might have, there's so many different influences have conflagrated upon my brain in the stages prior to I might be sitting there knowing that I was going to be determined to do something, and that knowledge would influence the decision that I made. But I'm recognizing the influences upon my decision, and I'm still maintaining a choice. Maybe not a free choice, but I'm maintaining a choice. Where this kind of looks like I might be getting into illusionism, but I'm not, because I'm going to accept that I don't have free will, but I'm not going to accept that my choice is entirely determined from the beginning of the universe. And there's not enough time to fully explain that. So we'll move on to doubtful libertarian. The doubtful libertarian part of me wants to say, yes, you still have free will. You are in the way that Van Inwagen means it. So I'm not going to say the universe is indeterministic. I think that's not very easy to prove, but rather that I am a causal agent in some way. There's some causal events that I can initiate, that I can just separate myself from this physical cause and effect, and I can flick that domino, or I can, run over that bear, whatever. I can do that. But I'm perturbed. I'm upset with the fact that the libertarian can't show me at what point I can do that. There just doesn't seem to be, whether from what we understand from neuroscience or from what we understand, just thinking about making a decision abstractly, in the abstract, I can't cut myself off. I don't see where I can track that back to a point where I say, oh, at this point right here, I decided to be in metaphysics, or at this point right here, I decided to go to Bethel. That's just, I can't show that point is. And Van Inwagen accepts that. He says that's the great mystery of libertarianism. I just really don't like accepting that. But as I said, both of my theories are still very much compatible and cohesive with the rest of my metaphysics. So the soft determinist, you might bring up the objection, well, you believe there's a God from your religious experiences, but you're going to say that you're determined. Doesn't that mean you don't have any moral actions? But I don't think that's true at all. I think you just have a very interesting, you have a much more interesting moral code than what most people would assume that you have. And so whether or not you're going to say something along the lines of Waller's theory that free will perhaps exists on a kind of separate plane from our physical actions, so that we as beings, we kind of are making free choices about what we think or about how we orientate ourselves towards our our decisions or towards the way in which we are determined to act. I think there's something really interesting there that can still be accomplished without making your God a demon and without giving up all moral responsibility. For the libertarian, you're still gonna be able to suppose that I could have free will in this universe, that I could be freely choosing to engage with individual things and objective facts and other rational beings and orientating myself towards a purpose, but I just don't know how. I feel like I should, but I don't know how. So yeah, that would be Franklin Joyce's Metaphysics in a super brief summary because I am way over and I apologize for this. But I suppose that there are such things in the world. The world is made up of individual things. There are individual things. There are also individual things that are separate from conscious that have objective features. But those features are meaningless unless they are engaged with by a conscience. You can argue with me about that. I don't care. Temporality, I think that I'm going to be a growing block theorist. So I think that the past and the present are both existent, but the future is non-existent. It's not indeterminate necessarily. It could still be determined, but it just hasn't happened yet. And so it's not in any kind of meaningful way an existent thing because it just isn't there. It isn't is. There's nothing to experience it, or at least as we understand it, to experience it. Why the purpose of the world or the purpose of rational beings, I'm going to be a Christian agnostic on this, and I'm going to say through my experiences, I find it increasingly likely that that a divine being exists. However, I'm not going to suppose that likelihood or the reasons that I accept that being exists needs to be transposed or should be accepted by anyone else, and I entirely understand objections and doubts and the atheistic theories raised, and I don't think that detracts just because there might not be an inherent purpose in the universe. That doesn't detract from the purpose of rational beings. It's only in our orientation towards the universe and each other that we can gain purpose, and that's true whether or not there is a logos or there is a chaos. A rational being, we're going to give as a kind of just a platitude, human beings. And I'm not going to say that that's exhaustive or an exclusive list, but I'm going to say that there's a possibility that other rational beings could exist, not only extraterrestrial, but terrestrial rational beings. I'm going to say that the nature of rational beings is physicalist in nature. We are made of physical organism or physical kind of molecules just mashed together. There is no soul. There is no non-physical being or essence that's disconnected from us, that's engaged in any way. And then I think that we are either determined but still have some aspect of either examining our actions or choosing how to orientate ourselves towards our actions, or even possibly influencing or choosing our actions just in a limited way, or we have free will but we just don't really understand how to say it. But anyway, I have went way over and I apologize. I guess this should be the last interaction I have with metaphysics. It has been an incredibly, bountiful and rich and enjoyable and humorous experience, and I can't say that I have any regrets whatsoever, except for maybe the one time that I talked about sleeping with your wife, and I'm ending the video there. Peace.